Welcome back to the Everything Podcast. On today's episode, Gabe, Giannis, and I were back on the mic for our weekly episode. This one, we dive into, Gabe asked me if I've been in a fight before, so I answer it here on the podcast. We talk about the CrossFit semifinals, and of course, discuss the YETI question of the week. So stay tuned for that. Really appreciate all of you guys listening to these episodes. If you haven't, go back, check out the Cut for Khalipas, check out our other weekly episodes. Would really appreciate a rating or review. Definitely helps out the podcast. Without any further ado, let's dive into a great episode, Mr. Gabe Giannis. Let's go. So we asked on Instagram for the YETI question of the week. And this week, we had a lot of really good questions that came in, a bunch of them. And one of them was more of a joke, I think, maybe. What's the largest wild animal you think you could successfully fight and win? So I'll pitch that one over to you because you probably have some gnarly wild animals in Texas. We're actually dealing with a fox around our house. But I don't think that's as big of a deal as probably what you deal with. So let's start with you, and then I'll see what the largest wild animal I think I could fight is.
Well, first of all, you make it sound like I'm in the middle of Jumanji, which it feels like sometimes.
Bro, you live on a farm in I wouldn't say the middle of nowhere, but you're surely not in a downtown metropolitan area.
No, definitely not a downtown metropolitan area. But I think where a lot of people think that, if they see pictures and videos that we post of where we live, they think it's a lot more in the middle of nowhere than it actually is. We have everything we need, honestly, super close by. And there's no traffic anywhere, which honestly, just to me, I'd much rather things be further away distance wise, but never hit a single red light and a single bit of traffic that to me. And I think a lot of people would agree. But anyway, to the question, and I think it paints a pretty good segue into a story that I was going to tell anyway. So this week's been pretty crazy. And actually, I was thinking a lot about this morning because Ariel said something that got me thinking. She's in a bunch of Facebook groups, different moms of the area Facebook groups and neighborhood groups and whatever. And she said today, she was there's a lot of people that are new to Texas in these groups because a lot of people are moving into the state, And it was funny, her saying that, because I guess we've gotten to the point now where we don't consider ourselves new to Texas, which without going on a complete tangent, just it's crazy how fast time flies because we have almost been here for a full 3 years,
What's the qualification process to consider yourself a Texan?
Oh, dude, depends on who you ask. I bet if you ask Tim Kennedy, you get a much different answer than if you ask me. He's a little bit more of a Texas diehard.
I feel 10 years, you could call yourself a Texan. Don't you think?
I mean, no, because I've been here for 2.5 and I consider myself a Texan. I mean, I love it here, man. There's definitely it's funny because there's definitely a Texas pride thing. It's very true. It's a big stereotype, but it's very true. And I think that if you moved here because you like a lot of what, Texas is about, the outdoors and whatever, I think you buy into it pretty quickly and it just feels hey man, it's Texas. But anyway, the story I was going to tell you and how it all ties into this wild animal story. So we've been here for 2.5 years, and just in those 2.5 years, the area we live in has changed dramatically. And one of the things is that there's a decent deal of construction going on in our immediate area, and not actual, full on developments, but a bunch of the land that was just woods has been cleared out and they have sold them in 10-acre parcels where people are, building houses. So again, still pretty spaced out, right? One house per 10 acres, super spaced out, nothing crazy, but it's definitely had an impact on the wildlife. And talking to the neighbors, they don't see deer as much in the same places, but the big problem has been coyotes because they're getting kind of pushed out of what used to be where they would kind of hide and do their thing. And a lot more people are having run-ins with them. Our next door neighbor, unfortunately, this is actually super sad, recently lost a dog to the coyotes. It was a super, super small, older dog, because the dogs here also they wander around all the properties. They kind of you'll see the neighbors' dogs, they come over, it's all good, but no one's really fenced in. And it's been a big issue. So our neighbors unfortunately lost a dog. And yesterday morning, dude,
Do the coyotes just kill it and leave it, or do they actually eat it?
I think in that particular situation, they just left it because like the owner came out in time to like scare it away. But unfortunately, it had already kind of done damage. It was an older dog. So unfortunately that happened. But yesterday morning, I was actually sleeping in the living room because, again, side story, when there's a huge thunderstorm, I have to take our dog that lives indoor out of the bedroom because she freaks out and tries to get on the bed. And the baby's on the bed, dude. It's a mess. It's a whole mess. So I'm in the living room with our other dog, and they start barking like crazy. And I look outside the window, and dude, this coyote goes up to our barn. I see it go up to the barn, and the reason I didn't react right away is because I wasn't sure. Like I said, if it was a neighbor's dog, right?
Is this like a
You can't really
jacked
tell.
coyote or like a small coyote? Because I've seen coyotes around here. They're like skinny and frail. Or is this one like jacked?
No, it wasn't like a Jack Texas coyote. It was a California transplant coyote.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
it was a
Yeah.
Bay Area coyote.
A
No,
frail, a
yeah.
frail, yeah.
But no, it was pretty small. And dude, I see it go up to the barn, dude, and it walked into the barn and like 30 seconds later just came out with a chicken in its mouth. But like it literally walked in and walked out like you would go to the fridge to grab a snack. It was insane. Like clearly it had done that before because like we haven't kept count of the chickens in the barn because A, we have a lot, and B, they like roost in all different areas. But I've noticed that like we definitely don't have as many as we used to. And yesterday, like, dude, literally it walked in and then walked out with a chicken in its mouth. And our dog was barking like crazy from the porch here, but it wouldn't chase it until I let the other dog out, and then they chased it together, which is usually what they
Did it
do.
drop the chicken or did it
No,
keep
it ran off with the chicken. It was crazy. It was insane. Probably not like something super crazy for people that have been here for a while, but for us, some of this stuff is still pretty new. Anyway, so now I have to make sure that I kind of keep an eye out, and we're a little bit more careful about protecting the chickens. But it was pretty wild.
Dude, yeah, that's that primal, like walks in, grabs the animal, boom, walks out. But
Dude, it was insane.
when it comes to wild animals, I'm trying to think of like which one I think I would have a legitimate shot with. And I don't know where, like, I feel like I'm overestimating my capabilities and underestimating their capabilities because,
Well, what kind of weapons are you allowed to have in
well,
this
see,
in
now
this
that's the thing.
scenario?
I mean, dude, if you have weapons, I think you're having a completely different conversation. But if it's just hand-to-hand combat, then you also have to figure like what type of an animal would be willing to like throw down with you. Because if they are, they're probably ready to like, like I mean, most of these animals, I imagine if you're loud and big, they're probably gonna go away. I don't know, maybe a bobcat. I mean, I was just thinking because I run the trails. I run the trails a lot, and I
Cali
keep
bear versus bobcat.
yeah, or like a mountain lion, maybe. I mean, I don't know, dude. Mountain lions are pretty gnarly, like, but they always have these signs on the trails that say, hey, mountain lions, bobcats, beware. And I always thought to myself, like, if one showed up, I mean, dude, I don't know, man. I don't know. I think I'm talking a bunch of shit because in reality, I think one of these mountain lions who's really angry and hungry or something, they'd probably be tough to deal with.
Oh
So,
yeah, dude. They're like all muscle and they have teeth and claws. It's a funny question though. Have you seen that meme of like, just a reminder that like there's a percentage of the population that thinks that they can, defeat a grizzly bear in hand-to-hand combat, and just how absurd that is?
dude, I mean, it's like when you see these bar fights happen and you have these guys who just think that they're like incredible fighters with no, like I saw Tom DeBoss put up this video
Of the
of
two
just
kids
these
fighting, of those two guys?
dude,
Yeah.
it's,
I saw that.
it is the worst. These two guys are getting into a fight and it's in slow motion. And all you see is just miss, miss, miss. Like, I mean, it is just sloppy. And he brings up this fact, like, I don't know where in society, you start to figure like there's no earned confidence there, right? Like, I mean, if you've never really exposed yourself to these things, what makes you think that you could do it? But then all of a sudden you get into an altercation or whatever, and you think I mean, especially with some alcohol. But this video is pretty bad that Tom put up. That one got
Have
me.
you
That was a pretty good laugh.
have you ever actually been in a fight?
So yes, I have. Um, that's a good question, actually. So, I mean, obviously, so when it comes to like structured fighting, I used to spar a lot in Muay Thai, which was, so I used to have shin guards on. and I'd wear headgear, and I used to spar a lot doing that. And that was super intense, super intimidating. And I did that for a while. Obviously in jiu-jitsu, there's no striking. So it's a little bit of a different type of thing. I have done some training, but those are like structured training where I'll do like MMA style training, but it's very different. When it comes like old school, like street yard, is it street yard, street yard, whatever. Yes. So let's see. I got in a few little tussles when I was younger, but the one that like really reminds me the most is I was in high school, and at the time, Ashley and I don't know, we were probably like sophomores in high school, sophomore, juniors. So I don't know, however old we are, but we're old enough to know better. Like you shouldn't I wasn't like a 10-year-old kid getting in a little tussle. So we're at this like street fair, and for some odd reason, there's like a group of us guys, we thought we were cool. And then Ashley and her friends were with us too. We're having a good time. I think we might've been having a couple of drinks, but it wasn't anything crazy. So we're leaving the event, and we're just like walking on the sidewalk, chilling, just minding our own business. And this guy runs down the street, and he bumps into Ashley really hard, like kind of like checks her. And he's like super drunk, but he's just like, he's running and he checks her. And Ashley like kind of like knocks over or whatever. And I just look at the dude, and as he's yelling, he passes by me. I'm like, bro, you need to calm down. That's all I said. I was like, hey man, you need to calm down, because he's like drunk, being all crazy. And this dude, no words spoken, turns around. It doesn't say shit, just turns around and just comes at me. And we go at it. So me and this guy were fighting. And at that point, I had some actually, no, I had no formal fighting training. That came after. So this guy comes at me, but I was pretty big then. I was like 260 pounds. So I was pretty big. So this guy comes at me. I'll never forget, man, the way that there was no word spoken. He just turned around. Cause you know, a lot of times, like in these altercations, like people are like talking crap. There was nothing, no talking crap. Just turned around, starts charging me. And we get in this fight. And then all of a sudden, all of our friends get in this fight. And it probably lasted like, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. The police end up showing up. My shirt gets torn off, and like everything just goes to shit really quickly. So then my shirt's off, it's all nasty. And a buddy of mine gives me a sweater, and I put it on because the cops come, and they end up arresting this guy. And none of us got in trouble, but the cops like swarmed in on it. That's like probably the most like real example of like a fight that I've gotten into. That was like a fight, like real fight. Aside from that, I don't need to fight.
Here's my follow-up question. Was Matt Walker a part of this group?
I think he was there.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure he was there. You got to ask him about this time. No, you
I
know,
gotta
he
ask
was there.
Oh man.
You know, but anyways, that
makes the story that much better.
It was a good learning lesson for me because, you know, in the moment, right, you don't really think much of it. You're just like, hey man, you need to calm down. I didn't say like overly aggressively. It's just like, dude, he's running up and he hits my girlfriend. It just wasn't cool. Like, it wasn't like hey man, like, come on. And
well, I think that in that case, like, you have to say something.
Yeah.
You have to. Absolutely. Like, you know, yeah.
And hey, dude, it was just like the fact they just turned from 0 to 100. It was so yeah, that was that. But I mean, you know, nowadays, I mean, you know, this goes back into like what I do, because I train so much now, stand up and combatives. I'm much more comfortable. I would find it hard to believe. I think it'll be very unlikely for me to get into any type of physical altercation in the near future. I would think so, just because of how comfortable I am. I think that that would exude, that confidence would be exuded, and I don't think anything would happen. That's my assumption, but I don't know.
Well, I think that, you know, it speaks to that point of, you know, when people train in combatives or martial arts, right? Like the lesson is always that, like, you know, you have this skill set, but you should use it responsibly, right? It should be something that you have, but it shouldn't be something that now that you have all these skills, you're going out there and like looking for a fight. If anything, you understand why it's so important to like de-escalate at all costs while still having that, you know, in your back pocket if you need it, which I think is an important lesson. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and God, I can't forget who they were talking about, but they were talking about someone that was like hiring a security team, right? And usually when you think of security, you think of these like former linemen, like 6 something, like high 200, 300 pounds, like big guys. And when they recommended the security guy, the security detail for this like guy, I can't remember who it was. It was this like pretty unassuming, smaller guy, and he was like, dude, like, can you fight? Like, security, that's what you do. And he said, hey, you don't want those big bruisers to be your security. Like, my job isn't to like protect you when like a conflict happens. My job is to make sure that you never get into the position where we even need to go there. And I think it just speaks to that same thing, right? Like, the truest way to like, avoid conflict isn't necessarily to like go out there and seek it. That might seem obvious, but I think that that's what is taught in a lot of martial arts and combatives.
Yeah, man. So yeah, anyways, it's been a long time since, yeah, it's not something I'm interested in being a part of. I think as you get older and more mature, you start realizing that like, I don't know, did you see this video that was online? Uh give it 3 seconds. Have you seen this video? So
Mhm.
so this Navy SEAL who turned trans and then came back. So he was a man, or he, she, I don't get mad at me if I'm using the wrong terms. This individual went from a male to a female, now has gone back to male. I don't know what he or she refers to him. Well, no, actually, yeah, it's a male now. And he was on a podcast. I just happened to see it on YouTube, and he was explaining the disadvantages of going trans and things like that. He was talking about a lot of stuff. But anyways, the clip in particular that I found to be really, really interesting is he talks about how if people just gave each other 3 seconds, they'd probably realize they have a lot more in common than they don't, and that they could probably get along. And his story goes, essentially, he's on the roof of this house and he's in all of his optics. He was part of dev group like SEAL Team 6. He has all these like green optics on, and he's all, loaded up with all of his gear. And he gets on top of a roof, and there's a gentleman there who looks like for lack of a better term, I think he calls him a caveman, if I'm not mistaken, like, long hair, whatever, and is just like sitting, it was asleep on the roof. Well, as he comes up, this guy was protecting like his flock in the house, whatever. He has an AK-47 sitting right next to him. The guy comes up, and the dude with the AK wakes up. And so he grabs his gun, he starts to rotate towards this individual telling the story. And the guy's like, in Pashto, if I'm not mistaken, is the language, starts saying like, don't do it, put the gun down, put the gun down, put the gun down. And based on the rules of engagement, he had the ability, if he wanted to shoot this guy, but he chose to delay for 3 seconds. This guy ended up never pointing the barrel at him, put the gun down, and they end up having a conversation because the individual they both speak the same language of Pastuch, if I'm totally butchering that. So they end up getting to know each other. They let this guy go, okay, because he wasn't a threat. He was just trying to protect his family. 2 weeks later, he sees this guy at a bazaar, like an open bazaar, and he thought there was going to be trouble. This guy ends up thanking him for not killing him, and they end up becoming friends. The Navy SEAL buys a rug from this guy and continues to have a long like relationship with him. And it was just interesting because he equates it to, within those 3 seconds, I had a choice to either shoot this individual, or if I had just given him 3 seconds, now all of a sudden we have a relationship and realize we have more in common than we have different. And he was equating that to people this day and age with with all the social justice issues and everything going on. If you just gave somebody 3 seconds, you might realize you have more in common with them than you thought. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but it was a cool story. I'll have to send it to you.
Yeah, send it to me. I mean, it goes on the same vein of, I think we spoke about it last episode, the whole typing the email, or, sending them, typing out the message you were going to send and then giving it 3 seconds overnight, whatever, just giving it time and detaching from the emotion of the moment to like, okay, like, is this worth whatever I'm going to send, say, do, or is it not?
Yeah, for sure, man. Dude, I have in front of me some of the numbers. So It's just totally, I have some notes that I have in front of me from some of the work that I've been doing lately with CBP, NYPD, SJPD, and all these different things. And I'm writing down percentage of police departments that need additional fitness. And it's fascinating to me how many groups realize that like almost half their audience needs additional fitness. And I'm curious what, I saw a report this morning. I'm not to go off on more tangents like I always do, but I saw a report this morning that one group in I don't know if it was Tennessee or where it was, they're now going to start giving people bonuses if you hit 100 hours of jujitsu. I thought that was super cool. So basically, if you're a law enforcement officer, let's just say you make $100,000 for example, if you do 100 hours of jujitsu, instead of getting paid $100 an hour or whatever it is, you'll make 105. So they're going to start giving you, merit increases based on how much jujitsu you do. So to kind of use a less lethal. Jumping around here, it's just this was right in front of me with some other P&L information which I could share.
Yeah, man, it's a big problem, right? We've talked about it in the past. It's a huge problem. People that have decided to go into a career where their fitness and them being able to handle their bodies and really be proficient in combatives, and also like just being in shape enough to where they have the time to take those 3 seconds. Because I feel like a lot of times things that happen out there, and it's maybe easy for us to say because we're not essentially in the line of duty, but I think that a lot of times it's a lot more difficult to take a pause and take those 3 seconds and make the right decision when your heart rate is through the roof, when you have a side stitch because you're so out of shape, because you're running to where you have to make the decision. Whereas if you were just in better shape, right? If you take your fitness more seriously, it's so much easier to actually like think logically and be like, okay, what's the next step here? Instead of just like having to make a panic decision because you literally can't breathe. I think that it can't be overstated how important a base of fitness is for people to do the things that they even know in training, but have to do it when they're thrown into the fire and pressure tested, like you mentioned when you did the echelon front stuff.
Yeah, man. And that's why I'm glad the departments are being more aware of it. And, it'll help those people detach better, like we were talking about. So tomorrow I'm going to semifinals here for the games. I'll actually be doing some announcing, which will be cool. Some of the events, it's interesting because last week there was some feedback coming in that about athletes getting injured. So one of the events, I don't know if you saw it from the semifinals, was a toe to ring, a muscle up, and then a ring dip. Did you see that?
I did.
And then you're wearing a 20-pound backpack, go ruck. And I wanted to test this out because I wanted to see how it felt so as I'm commentating, but then I got in the moment and I was like, you know what? I don't want to test this out. Like, dude, it's just gnarly, man. Think about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I don't know. It just seems like a lot. I mean, but then again, these athletes essentially they're setting themselves up for this. I mean, this is what they're signing up for. It's just for me, it's just too much, dude. Like to do a toe to ring, to do a muscle up, to do a ring dip, I'm good. But to do it with the 20-pound pack on, it definitely changes your weight and where it's positioned. I just haven't been training enough to put myself in that position. I had to kind of check my ego the other day because I wanted to do it. I was like, it's just not worth it. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, the risk reward isn't there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I want to try it, but I think I could still commentate on it with relation to like I don't know if you've ever climbed a rope with a ruck on, but
No, I've never done anything with a ruck on. I think I've done like some muscle ups back in the day with a weight vest, but even that I think is different because a weight vest sits so flush on both your like frontal plane and on the back. Whereas the ruck, what probably makes it difficult is the fact that it's so weighted behind you, obviously.
Yeah, I mean that's the hard part about rope climbing. When you climb a rope, I did this at the Rogue Invitational years ago. Is when you climb a rope, normally you lean back and kind of pull your knees up towards your pull your basically knees towards elbows. But when you have a ruck on, when you lean back, the weight just starts to like kind of plummet you. And so you have to be more upright, almost like you're climbing vertically instead of using that horizontal energy. And so I imagine that's what a lot of the athletes are going through, right? On these muscle ups, if you lean back too far, they probably just feel like this backpack's just taking them forever. So we'll see how those events go. I'm headed there tomorrow. But I always like commentating on stuff and just kind of sharing my perspective from competing for so many years. So that's happening at Pasadena semifinals. Actually, when this releases, it'll already be over, but hopefully I did a good job.
No, I'm sure you will, man. It'll be fun to be out there. I'm sure you'll see a lot of familiar faces, and even though you're not competing anymore, I'm sure that the crowd will also appreciate just having you there and having you share your experience on it. You know, one thing that, and I think I mentioned this on this podcast before too, that I thought would be a cool idea for the Rogue Invitational, for example, is to have like some of the old school people, you know, be able to pick a wheelhouse workout, right? Like maybe not the one with the ruck, but something that you could do and either test it or do it alongside the athletes. I just think it'd be a cool way to see how some of the like old school people can stack up on something that, you know, is within their wheelhouse.
Yeah. Oh,
But
so like, let's just say there's 10 events. You're like, hey, Jason, you could pick any of these to jump in a heat with these guys and see how you stack up.
exactly.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah. I'd pick like a Echo bike. I don't know. I'd like to think that I'm in okay shape, but some of those guys, man, they're on another level. So, but that would be a cool idea. So the Rogue Invitational is coming up in October. So I think they're going to be having the same categories and stuff like that. That'll be a cool event. For anybody who hasn't been, the Rogue Invitational has always been someone that we like going to every year. So hopefully they have a Legends category and I get invited again.
Here's an interesting kind of follow up to what we spoke about last week with Mal O'Brien and
Oh
you know
yeah, yeah.
the pressure of like being a super young athlete, and now the fact that a lot of these athletes are skipping doing any traditional sports and going right into like CrossFit all in. What I thought was interesting, and again, there's a lot of caveats to this, so let me just put that out there. But I thought was interesting was last week, Sydney Wells qualified for the CrossFit Games, and Brooke Wells did not, which is super interesting, right? Because they're identical twins. One of them, Brooke, has been in the sport now. This was going to be potentially her 9th year qualifying for the games. And her twin, Sydney, had gone the traditional following the sport route, had done track and field in college, was a very good track and field athlete, and just now has transitioned into the sport of fitness. And she made the games and Brooke didn't. Now, the caveats there are Brooke is just coming off of an elbow injury from the games last year, you know, but I think that that speaks to this, like, are you getting banged up by doing this sport this much for so many years? And is there some benefits to pursuing a more specialist type sport like track and field and just being athletic and then transitioning to the sport of fitness later on? I thought it was, as I was kind of like reading through the headlines, I thought that was a super interesting thing to come up given what we were talking about last week.
Yeah, I'd love to actually dive into that more. I'd like to be able to look into like that's a really interesting test case, right? Is you're saying when did they both get into cross at the same time, but just one chose to compete, one didn't? Because I think Brooke also did track and field, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know.
She did. I think they split off once they got to college because her sister Sydney was a D1, went on to go do track and field in D1. I believe this is all like kind of like memory and things that I've read. I haven't looked into it, but I do know that the reason that she's just competing now is because she was doing track and field in college and she was good.
Yeah, I need to go look. I'm curious about that just for myself. But the one thing I do know for a fact is that Brooke Wells was 1 second away from qualifying. Oh, and I want to talk about this because something that I told myself, and this goes for anybody competing in anything at any point. If Brooke, so there's only been, you know, you and I have talked about this a little bit. There's been very few instances where I feel like I could have done more than what I did in an event. And if Brooke walked away from that run snatch event, I think it was either run snatch or snatch run, one or the other, 1 second off. If she finished that event and she said to herself, I just did everything in my power to perform the best I could, and that was all I had, then really she has nothing to like be frustrated about. But if she thought even for an instant that she had more in her tank, that 1 second is going to eat her up for a little bit, but it'll give her good fuel for the next time she competes. Because for me, I experienced that. I experienced where I gave up a little bit mentally, and I just was like, it's like, I'm good. I got plenty more events this weekend. I'm just going to kind of like, it was just like a second of self, just kind of like break. And it haunted me. Right. And then I told myself, moving forward, I'll never compete in another event ever again and leave any doubt in my mind that I didn't give my best effort. Because if you end up losing by 1 point or 1 second or 1 rep, dude, it just eats at you because you wonder what if. And I feel bad for her in that particular case, because I hope she's not in the position that I was in, where I reflected on, I was like, damn, I could have done it. I could have done 1 second, That's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what's tough about some stuff like that too, especially at the level that the sport has gotten to now, because I would make the argument that everyone at the top of their game now is leaving it all out there. I think that the differentiator now sometimes becomes strategy and, a decision that you made, as opposed to like, did I give it 99% versus 100%, right? I think that back in the day, maybe that was definitely a differentiator. And I think that that's what made you incredibly popular back in the day, is because you always were the guy that was just like grinding it out. Like, watching you compete was fun, because it was very obvious that that was like maybe not 100% of technique and like, proficiency and whatever, but like 100% effort was literally always there. And I think that that made you very relatable as an athlete. And it was fun to watch, honestly. I think that now it's gotten to the point where everyone's putting that kind of effort out there. I think it becomes so much about like the decisions that you made and like the game within the game. So then it becomes a little tough, because you can always second guess strategic decisions, always, no matter what effort you put in.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of those things where like, I don't know what Ash and I were talking about the other day. We were talking about something, but it's like, you make the best decision you can with the information you have at the moment. And you just got to be able to just fall back on that, right? Like, it is what it is. Like, you're making the best decision you can. But 1 second, man, that's tough. That's
That's
really,
brutal,
really
man.
tough. It's
That's
brutal. Like, I mean, that's the closest I think I've ever heard. I could be wrong. I don't want to. That is one of the closest I've ever heard from an athlete not qualifying for the games, is being 1 second off a running event. Like that's crazy. Like, 1 rep, 1 pound. Okay, I get that. But 1 rep and 1 second on a running event, dude, that's tough, man. And I just hope that, she uses this as fuel for her next step, whatever that might be. She's created a lot of popularity. She's came back from a terrible injury. And now that her sister's in, hopefully, I don't know. I don't know how many more years any of these athletes have. I mean, Annie Thorisdottir is breaking records every single day. I mean, dude, she's been dominant since 2009. She's so inspirational. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting too. Like, Tia coming back as a mom. Is she going to come back as a mom? Is she not? Like, what's that going to look like? Annie came back as a mom and kicked ass. Like,
Yep.
that'll be an interesting thing to see. Mal O'Brien coming back, that'll be interesting to see. But the other thing that I'll mention, and I didn't watch any of semifinals,
So
but
why
I
didn't you
thought,
watch any of the semifinals? That's the question, right? Because I'll tell you my theory, but go ahead. Yeah.
do you want to know why I didn't watch?
Yeah. Why didn't you watch it?
I'm just not bought into any particular person right now. And I think that I'll watch the games when it's maybe a little bit easier to watch and like the stakes are a little higher. But like, especially now, dude, like my free time is this much, like we have a 6-month-old, like things are busy. Like, I'm not carving out time to watch the semifinals of the CrossFit Games, even if I would want to. I think that back in the day, another difference for me was just like, it was kind of like well, what do I do with the next 3 hours of my weekend? That does not exist anymore.
Yeah. I remember telling you, I think I told you that like a while ago. I was like, bro, it's gonna go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, dude, the semifinals,
But what I was going
yeah,
to say though is I didn't watch it, but I followed a lot of like the clips and stuff on social media. And the one thing that sounded like it happened and really cool, and hats off to Brooke, was, when her sister qualified and they were announcing the qualifications, like she was right there, like super happy for her and like supporting for her. And that's really cool, given how difficult it probably was to miss
oh,
out, being there and cheering for, your sister, your family, your best friend, is a sign of like a true awesome relationship. So I think that was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, dude, 100%. That must have been so difficult for her because in the moment you're probably so happy for her because if I'm pretty sure that's her first games
Hmm.
qualification. And so in the moment you're probably like, you know how much sacrifice she put in. She knows, but then also not to be able to experience that for yourself. It's just that's very difficult. But the semifinals, what was interesting about them, and I don't know how they're gonna solve this. I don't know what they're gonna do for this weekend, is some of the events were covered like super professionally, and some of the events were covered like low key. And so the feedback I gave to HQ is like, look, if you want to go like hard in the paint and have like really great commentator and great camera angles and all that stuff, like rock and roll. If you want to go iPhone, just put in the corner and that's like the expectation, that's fine. But when you have both, it's just so glaring the difference because the first event was done like with an iPhone, essentially. I'm probably understating it. And then after that, it went to professional. And so it just showed the drastic difference between experiences and the people in the comment sections obviously ate that up. But I think if they had just kept with one, people wouldn't have noticed it as much. So this week and next week in the games, I wonder how they're going to handle that. We'll see. And then NOBULL didn't show up at the semifinals either. That's pretty odd.
What's going on there?
Well, supposedly they let go of 70. Supposedly let go of like I don't know.
75 employees and their chief marketing officer, if I'm not mistaken, resigned.
Yeah, but it's a really good example of like just when a company grows so fast, we had those same problems. So like in 2012, I think we achieved a major milestone and signed a big deal with Western Digital. And that deal took us all over the globe. We opened up like 15 locations within the span of a year. And we had some growing pains there. I'll be the first to admit, like you're just trying to keep up, you're just trying to grow. And I imagine with NOBULL, here they are, they've seen some tremendous growth and maybe they've had to kind of, take a step back and kind of figure out what the future looks like for them. But as the key sponsor of the games, it is a little odd. They didn't have any semifinal presence, but supposedly they still took care of the volunteers. They still took care of the athletes or whatnot, but to not have any presence is kind of odd.
Super odd, right? Because what I saw posted was that they had a spot carved out for them in the vendor village and they just weren't there. It was just empty, like empty prime real estate in these vendor villages. So yeah, who knows, man? But
it, look, whatever. It is what it is. Businesses have to do what they have to do. And I think that, we've talked about this before. It's just like, if they didn't see the return on their investment from setting up, or if they weren't in a position to do it and execute well, and they want to prioritize the games, good on them. Let them do their thing. Like, it's fine. It just was odd that they have like a space carved out and that they weren't actually there. It would have probably been nice not to even have any space carved out so that people didn't have any expectations, or if they had announced like, hey, we're not going to be here, we're going to go big at the games. I think just that communication probably would have alleviated people making assumptions. That's all.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the semifinals, we'll have to see what happens with the games. I'm still making the push for two things. We should get rid of the teen division, the 14-15. I think that we should encourage them to go do a bunch of other stuff, and we should talk about that more. And the other is, I think we should have more events that are streamlined, that repeat themselves on an annual basis, so that we could have a sport that you could compare back to. And those are the two things I'm going to keep bringing up. And then hopefully one day they'll gain some more traction, because I just think that every year, just all these new events, it's hard to keep track of as a spectator, and it's also hard to relate to, like they did I think, the circular, handstand not parallettes, but,
Pirouette.
yeah, I'm butchering that one again, but they're doing this new, these movements, and I've kind of messed around with that, but I haven't done it the way they did it. And so I just think as a spectator, they need to be aware of like, what are they trying to test? And if they could relate to the spectators, because if they want to grow the sport, reinventing the wheel every time, it becomes really tough. The unknown and unknowable is difficult when you're trying to gain new spectators. Current ones and diehard CrossFitters, they love it. And so I think the games just kind of have to balance that, because I imagine it's a tough thing to balance. And I'm lucky I'm not in their shoes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Another clip that I saw around the weekend from Andrew Hiller, who was there, was he ended up being in the stands and started talking to a woman he was sitting next to. And it was an interesting exchange because the woman he was sitting next to was apparently there to watch her daughter's boyfriend competing on a team. So she was very like, she wasn't a diehard CrossFitter. She was just kind of like there supporting, like essentially like a friend of a daughter, right? So like not even super invested. And she didn't know where her family was at the time. So she was just trying to make the most of the time she was there. And he got into a really interesting conversation where he was like, do you know what's going on? And she was like, no, like, I don't see a clock. I don't know what the event is that they're doing. And it pointed out a lot of what you're saying, because this person who happened to be there was having not the best experience, because there was no way for someone like that that isn't completely immersed in the sport to even understand what's happening on the floor. And I think that there are relatively easy fixes. Like he was talking about, like, why isn't there a big clock that everyone in the audience can see? And why isn't there like a big display of the workouts? Why isn't there like a video playing on some sort of jumbotron before the event while people are walking in that explains the workout and shows like what the athletes are about to do and kind of gives a breakdown of where they are? So I think that there's definitely some area for improvement, but again, much easier said than done. And, you know, lucky to not be in those shoes where we're trying to figure out the logistics of running something like that and solving all those problems, because it's also multiplied then by how many semifinals are there, right? It's not like you have to figure out one event. You have to figure out all these events across different geographical places with different teams for international in different languages. Like, dude, it is a bear of a project. I also think it's unfair to like sit back in your chair and be like, well, do a better job, stream better. Like there's a lot that goes into that. Now, do I think that CrossFit can, you know, needs to step it up no matter how hard it is if they really want to see the growth? Maybe, but also we have to realize that like it's a lot easier said than done, right?
100%. And I think one of the things that I'm relating to is like detaching from your perspective is something I'm thinking about for this, is that you get caught up in your echo chamber. So like, for example, I was talking to Zach. He's one of our coaches. He's super into the sport. Him and Margot, super into the sport. And so when we talk about the different events or different things, like they know it like the back of their hand. They know the event, they know the time domain, they know the athletes, they know everything because they're really into it. You know, they listen to all the podcasts, they watch all the coverage, they follow the athletes, like they're really into it. And for many years, that's where I was, obviously, like really into it. And so when people would talk about things, I would just assume they just knew, like, how would you not know that? Like, how did you not know that event number 3 is, you know, a 3-minute AMRAP with this? Like, because you can't put yourself in a different perspective because you're so engulfed in it and probably your surrounding network that everybody just assumes. But all of a sudden, as you become one step removed, and I'm not like following the sport as closely, still following, but I'm like one fringe away. I'm not even like very far away, right? I'm going to be commentating at the event this weekend, but yet there's still a lot of things that I don't even know. And so I think making it clear for that like fringe and then the fringe outside of that to get them engaged on the sport, I think is important. And I think we need to kind of take a step back and take off our hat of like a avid, like diehard CrossFitter and think about the person who's just on the fringe of the sport. How can we clearly communicate to them what the events are, how many people are qualifying, all that kind of stuff. And I know they're trying to do that. It's just difficult when the rules change every year, but hopefully they've solidified. Like, for example, I didn't know how many people went from semifinals to the finals. I had to go double check that online. And in Florida, for example, it was 12 men and 11 women or vice versa. But there was a different amount between the men and women based on the percentages. So you would have to know the sport to know that that was the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause even when there were regionals, that stuff was so much more structured. Like it was so much more easy to know because you knew that it was
top 5.
Now I forget, but yeah, it was like top 5. And then, you know, it was equal across all of them, which I know made it like a little unfair because some regions were more stacked than others. That was always kind of like the criticism back then, but at least you knew because everything was the same.
For sure. I definitely want to, before we close.
YETI question of the week, the real one, not the one about fighting bears and coyotes.
So the fighting bears and coyotes, we won't use that one for this week. Any plan? Well, this one was just, you know, random. Any plans for an NCFIT Jocko victory workout plan? Yeah, Mike.
Oh boy.
You know, I'm obviously.
Oh boy.
I'm fired up to combine some jujitsu, some protector, and some fitness. So stay tuned for that. I think that for sure that's something that's really important. I'd love to do more of that. So yes, we're working with those guys heavily right now.
I wouldn't be surprised if we go in and like see who this Mike guy is that asked the question. It's definitely like Jason's second account. Jason like created an account to ask himself questions
Oh
so he can
man.
talk about things he shouldn't talk about on the podcast.
So was it did you want to do this one? Please define job duties of a full-time coach and number of classes and other responsibilities that we want to talk about today?
Dude, your role here is to pick the Yeti question of the week, and then I answer it. We answer it.
Yeah, let's start with that. So please define job duties of a full-time coach and number of classes and other responsibilities. Now, I think that, and they also talk about a realistic salary and things like that, but I think that let's start there about the coach, and our business is a little bit different than a sole proprietor. Like our business has a variety of different revenue streams and opportunities for our coaches. So it is a little bit different. But the way we define a full-time coach is a 30-hour work week at minimum that allows them to have the opportunity to have 401k, health, dental, all that kind of stuff kicks in at 30 hours a week. And the way that we divide out those 30 hours a week is that a full-time coach for us works in a variety of different ways, including they have a PT rate if they're doing personal training, they'll have a coaching rate, and then they'll have an administrative rate. And the administrative rate could be the front desk, could be them writing session plans and programming for NCFIT, right? We put it out for gym owners and coaches to the collective. The people that are helping us with that are real coaches. And so we try and keep the coaching to about 20 hours a week or around that, give or take 20, 25. And the rest of their hours are filled with the administrative type work. So that's the way we do it. And I think that our goal in the future, this is our goal. Currently, our coaches get paid pretty well, in my opinion, not to where we want to go. But as part of that total compensation comes the health, the 401k, all that kind of stuff. In the future, we're looking to increase the hourly pay and maybe not be as focused on the additional benefits, because our team seems to be more inspired by the amount they make per hour versus the additional benefits. So we want to align their expectations with what the company's trying to give them. So in the future, I'll be sharing more about that, but that's what we're currently doing is full-time do get those things. But in the future, we might end up just paying more per hour, paying more for salary, and removing some of those things.
Yeah. Jay, I mean, obviously you're in the ins and outs of this stuff, and you did a good job explaining how we define a full-time role. I think for anyone asking the question, because we're in such a unique situation, I think that the question that's a little bit more valuable is maybe how do you just generally define? And I think that the important piece of that is you have to define it, right? We've talked about this before, and culture and clarity kind of being at this base of the pyramid of how we develop great coaches and how any gym can develop great coaches. And I think what's most important, because you might not define it as 30 days and you might not have an administrative rate and a coaching rate. You might not have that need yet. But I think what is universally important and should answer this question for anyone out there that is owning or operating a gym is you have to define it. You should have a job description that very clearly outlines what it means to be a full-time coach. And therefore, you should have a job description that very clearly defines what it means to be a part-time coach. And what are the differences between the two, and not just rate and hours, but expectation. Is there an added expectation if you're going to be full-time? Are there roles and responsibilities outside of getting there at minute 0 and then checking out at minute 60 of a 1-hour class? The more that you put this stuff on paper and make it extremely black and white, the better, because then there's very clear expectations of what you're expecting and what the coach doing the job has to do like a good job or falling short of that. So I think that that's the most important takeaway, because I do think that what we do is unique because we have the collective, we have coaches that program for the app, session plans, so on and so forth. And I know that not every gym out there is also going to have the need yet for administrative hours and coaching hours, because they might not necessarily be paying someone to be front desk, even though they should. right? That's one of those things that, you know, you're not going to be able to afford a front desk person until you actually pay a front desk person. We've talked about that before. So that would be kind of just the biggest takeaway that I would sum up is whatever it is for your business where you are now, the important part is defining it, and not just defining it in like a, oh, well, this and this and that. No, on paper, in a job description that is signed by you and the coach, and it's clearly understood. And most importantly, is updated if that changes, right? Like as the company grows and evolves, that role might grow and evolve. And you might have a conversation like, hey, Jason, you know, now we are going to have you do some front desk here and there, and that's going to be a different rate. Great. Update the job description, and that should outline that as well.
Yeah, that's all part of the culture and clarity. You know, I'm gonna be speaking tomorrow on this idea of coach like a pro. And at the cornerstone of that is the culture you're trying to set at your gym, and then clarity with your team back and forth. It's a two-way street. So you want to have clarity with, you know, what is the coach trying to accomplish over the next X amount of years, and what can the company do to provide that to him? And just having clear, concise, you know, like we're just finishing our quarterly or semi-annual coaching evaluations. And that's a really good opportunity for us to then provide feedback to our team, show them trajectory and where that's going in the future. So definitely there's a lot to unpack here with this question. I think that one thing I do want to talk about before we close out, I was talking to a gym owner and I asked them a question. I said, oh, hey, you know, what does your membership base look like? What does your revenue look like? How is it broken down? And this gym in particular is doing a lot of PT and also memberships. But when I actually had them break down the numbers formally, it really was eye-opening for the individual. And so if you're a gym owner out there, you're listening to this and you're in the, you know, you're in the day and today, you're grinding, right? You're coaching, you're PTing, you're getting after it. Sometimes it's difficult to set aside time to really go into your QuickBooks, go into your books, go into your, you know, Wodify account, whatever you're using, and really look at where the revenue is coming. But what I think you should do is just set aside some time, because if you don't know your numbers, you can't grow your numbers. And what oftentimes happens is that you might be robbing, my dad uses this statement all the time. I don't even know, robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? I don't know. He says this all the time, where you might be taking money from doing your, like, for example, your kids class. It might be draining resources tremendously, but you just don't know it because you haven't ran the numbers effectively. So just make sure that if you are listening to this, if you are a gym owner, you need to know your numbers. You need to know where revenue is coming in from, where expenses are at, because it might be super eye-opening to you what's actually draining on your resources versus actually adding value to the business. So this podcast, we don't go too hardcore on business, but every now and then I just want to make sure we share the, you know, little things that we learn in our organization.
Yeah, and just what I would do to tie that back to literally anyone that's listening is the same thing goes for personal finances, man. Something that, you know, I mentioned this before, diving into a little bit more seriously now that we have a family. Same thing goes, man. Like you got to look at everything. There's a lot of things in there that when you really pay attention to, you might be like, oh, should probably change that.
Yeah, that DoorDash and you know what, bro? We've had a car like once or twice a week now. There's a car coming up our driveway at like 3 or 4 a.m. We see them on our cameras. Dude, I gotta look into it. I'll keep you posted on that. I'll keep you posted.
That's sketchy.
Sketchy, right, dude? Like what the fuck?
Oh man. The one thing that I want to mention before we head out. So I had a call earlier this week with Zach from Boulder CrossFit. And he mentioned that he listens to the podcast, loves the podcast. So shout out to Zach. And then I just saw an email come in from him. He's signing up for the collective. So shout out again to Zach for making an awesome decision for Boulder CrossFit and coming on board with the collective. Just wanted to give him a shout out because I literally just saw the email come in. And I love that. Excited to have them be a part of what we do, and excited to have them listening to the podcast.
Yeah, gym owners, coaches, make sure you guys are checking out the collective. That's our session plans, our programming. We have Coach Like a Pro. That's this first cohort is pretty much almost, I imagine when this podcast comes up, it'll pretty much almost be closed. But make sure you guys check that stuff out. Make sure you're checking us out online. And yeah, if you're rolling jiu-jitsu or you're in the protector space, get excited. There's more to come, Gabe's looking forward to putting on his first gi, or actually not his first gi. We getting him into jiu-jitsu, and you know, we're working closely with several people in that space. So excited to share with you guys some stuff coming out in the future. But for now, gym owners, coaches, make sure that you're checking out the things we're providing. We've been owning and operating gyms for a long time. I think we have some really incredible products to share. And the Coach Like a Pro course, I'm really, really looking forward to diving in, especially on those calls. So keep crushing it, keep getting after it. And Gabe, really appreciate you, man. And look out for those coyotes.